it's already 3 minutes past 12. You'll be delighted to know that this regulation, the Right to Repair Directive, is not a massive piece of regulation compared to some of the other stuff that we deal with. But just by means of a brief introduction, this presentation on this webinar follows the usual kind of framework that I use. So we'll talk about what is the regulation's purpose, what's the timeline, you know, when's that hard implementation date so we can all get geared up for it. What's it actually aiming to achieve, linking it with some of the other regulation. Obviously, this is very heavily linked with the EU's sustainability goals. And then we'll talk about the products in scope and the kind of companies in scope. And we'll talk about, you know, looking at the regulation through the lens of a consumer and looking at it from the perspective of an EU business, but also our guys here in the UK and other countries selling into the EU. What does it mean for them? And then always like to end on a positive note. So we'll talk about some of the opportunities, because like everything, like all regulation, there will be some for whom things become a little bit more challenging, but then regulation gives rise to others that can have an opportunity in the market as a result of that regulation. And then always finish on the last bit, which is how can we get more informed about forthcoming regulation and keep ahead of the curve. The very fact that you guys are on the call today, I'm guessing you got our outbound email anyway, so you're already on that list. But if you're joining from another company and you want to be added to our opt-in community, then just pop us an email. I've got a final slide on that. So those of you that have joined my webinars in the past will have heard me talk about the Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan. So the directive, the Right to Repair Directive, kind of sits within that or has common goals with that. So it aims to establish common rules that promote the repair of goods throughout the EU. It was adopted in June 2024 and it comes into its kind of like hard implementation at the end of July next year. So member states and Northern Ireland and the EEA markets will have until the end of July next year to transpose the directive into their national law and to be applying it essentially. Now, some of you might have been familiar with me talking about the EU Green Deal. It's basically the centre around which all of the EU's sustainability regulation revolves. But I'll just cover off a little bit about it for those of you not so familiar. So it's really, like I say, it's its flagship strategy, if you like, and it's all based on the EU wanting to become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And there are a plethora of directives and regulations that it has created to help it achieve this. So these directives and regulations, of which today's is just one of them, is geared to helping the EU transform its economy, its energy systems, its transport, its agriculture, and its industry towards sustainability. Now, the Green Deal was launched in 2019, so under the period of Ursula von der Leyen, and it sets out basically a pathway to decouple economic growth from the use of resource, if that makes sense. So it's kind of, in the past, economic growth might have been perceived to have only been achievable through the burning of fossil fuels, and now it's trying to demonstrate that actually sustainability can be a pillar of growth as well. It legally binds the Commission to its net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and that's how it's attached to the European climate law. Now, you might have heard the term fit for 35 rather. That's a kind of intermediary check where the Commission's going to look and say, okay, we've got this big hairy audacious goal for net neutral by 2050. We're going to check in at 2035 and see if we're on course to hit that objective. But like I say, it is a big, hairy, audacious goal, and it spans lots of different legislative pillars. So some of the ones that you're going to hear me talk about today are obviously the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, but there's a whole host of them over and above that support the EU's objectives for this. As part of the EU Green Deal, also, you might have heard me on webinars before talk about sustainable financing and green purchasing and so on. The Green Deal holds rules and regulations around that. And it's often described, I'm guilty of it as well, I'll describe it as an environmental agenda, the EU Green Deal, but the EU would argue that it's much, much more than that. They argue that it's a growth strategy, that it aims to create green jobs, foster innovation, and improve quality of life for everybody across the EU. So I'd get my knuckles wrapped for calling it an agenda. And fundamentally, it's saying that it's responding, it's in response to consumers, particularly younger consumers, that are looking for the EU to take action on climate change. And again, the EU wants to position itself as that very kind of, foremost leader in terms of sustainability regulation globally. The EU Circular Economy Action Plan is part of that European Green Deal. It's really a cornerstone of that strategy. So you may have heard me talk about that before. It's all about promoting the sustainable product design and sustainability as a cornerstone of kind of like consumption. So it's all about empowering consumers to make the right decision. It's about changing the practices of manufacturers to have sustainability at the core of their design. And currently it impacts over the last couple of years as we build up to this, products like electronics, batteries, packaging, plastics, and more coming into the fore as textiles and construction and so on. So as I mentioned, all of the Green Deal and the circular economy, they're all targeting the kind of promotion of sustainable consumption. But the way that the EU's approaching that is multifaceted. So if you're signed up to our webinar program, you'll see lots of different webinars for over the coming months, and some that we've done previously, because they're all part of the EU's sustainability, I'm going to say it, agenda. So today we're talking about the Right to Repair Directive, but in a few weeks' time, we're talking about the Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition Directive. You'll have heard me talk about digital product passports, green public procurement. What we haven't probably covered, but it is relevant for some regions across the UK, is that sustainable food systems and farm to fork strategy. We've got a webinar coming up on combating greenwashing, and it's all of these directives and regulations are linked to the EU achieving this hairy, audacious goal of being net neutral by 2050. So the regulation that we're talking about today is the Right to Repair Directive, and that is very much linked to the Eco-Design Directive, which is shortly or already actually been replaced by the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, and it's linked to the Empowering Consumers in the Green Transition. So when we do that webinar, we'll kind of like link it all up so you see how it all sits together. Directives, let alone regulation, are a lengthy process, especially when you have to get the consensus of 27 member states. So essentially what you need to know from these bullet points here is, yes, there was a lot of argy-bargy, backwards and forwards negotiations and so on between the 27 member states, the council, the parliament and so on. But fundamentally, the regulation is technically in force. but it has to have its hard implementation at the end of July 2026. So technically, we're in this transition period at the moment. With every piece of regulation or a directive, the EU usually has an 18-month transition period between the entry into force of the regulation and it becoming kind of gospel, where everybody needs to comply. The regulation, for those of you sad like me, actually replaces a number of existing legislative instruments. So where we're selling to consumers in the EU, we should be very au fait with the Consumer Protection Cooperation, or the regulation for that, and the Sale of Goods Directive we should be up on, and a number of others. But this regulation actually amends that. It gives more power to the consumer. And again, like I say, it supports and is complementary to the Eco-Design for Sustainability Products Regulation and the Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition Directive. There are within Annex 2 of the directive, I keep saying regulation, but it's not, it's a directive. They're two very different things. It has a list of products that are currently within scope. So as of the end of July next year, these are the products that need to comply with the regulation. But as with everything that the EU does, it withholds the right to extend that list of products via additional delegated acts. You'll have heard me talk about those in the past as well, whereby the Commission can issue those to amend regulation without having to go back out to the Council and the 27 member states and so on. And then, as with every piece of regulation, post the end of July, the EU will be monitoring its effectiveness, seeing if it's actually doing what it's meant to do, and always reserves the right to actually amend it if it's not. So essentially, what are the objectives? So fundamentally, it aims to make repair the default option for consumers via means of and as a byproduct that reducing waste and strengthening that circular economy. So how will it do that? Well, essentially it's aiming to extend or prolong the usability of consumer goods by making repair more accessible across the whole of the EU, and making it affordable but also legally supported. So giving those additional legal powers to consumers where they can demand a repair for their goods, even after the warranty period or the guarantee period has ended. So that right to repair beyond the actual legal guarantee, so that has big implications for manufacturers, where they'll typically offer their repair services up to the end of that guarantee period, and then it's for the consumer to determine what they do after that. There will now be a requirement on manufacturers to provide repair, or repair services companies to provide that after the warranty period or the guarantee period is ended. So it's amended the Sale of Goods Directive to prioritise that repair over replacement. It supports the circular economy and Green Deal, like I've mentioned, so it reduces that resource use, and that's all tied to lowering emissions and fosters that whole circular business model. And obviously, one of the things is about increasing that transparency and consumer confidence. So by mandating a standard repair information form, which we'll come on to in a separate slide, everybody's working. Anybody who's seen my GPSR presentations, I talk about this withdrawal product, or this standardized form that everybody has to use if they have to pull a product from the market. The EU is going more and more towards these standard forms, not just for individual member states to be using the same and have that harmonized approach, but also making sure that third countries, so businesses based outside of the EU, are all using that standard kind of form or providing that same standard data. So that that standardized repair information form will make sure that consumers receive very clear, very comparable data on repair costs, how long a repair is going to take, and so on. And it's determined that that will help build trust and help consumers to make more informed decisions. That facilitate access to repair services. So there is, in addition to the standard repair information form, there's also going to be an EU-wide online repair platform. That won't be finalised until next year, but essentially that's going to connect consumers with repairers, with manufacturers, refurbished product providers, and so on. And the idea is that that platform simplifies the search for those repair options and promotes that whole, importantly, cross-border service availability. So consumers will no longer have to rely on repair services within their own member state. They'll be able to source perhaps more cost-effective repair services from outside, i.e. in another member state. It also empowers those independent repairers, so potentially not necessarily the manufacturer of the original product, because the manufacturers will be mandated to provide access to spare parts, repair instructions, diagnostic tools, and so on. And the idea is that it reduces the monopoly that the large companies have over that post-sale services. And the whole idea is that it fosters more competition and innovation in the repair sector, full stop. Most, if not all, of EU regulation and directives now are all about strengthening the internal market. Some of us might see that as almost precluding companies that are selling into it. It's not necessarily that, but obviously as a trading bloc, it wants to recognise as much revenue and maintain as much revenue within that trading bloc rather than sourcing from outside. So by harmonising those repair rules across all member states, it enhances that kind of legal certainty and market consistency, enabling businesses that are established within the bloc to deal with all kind of like services or repairs that are needed within the block itself. And essentially, this, together with the other regulation that I've mentioned, just represents this massive shift, really, that we see the EU undertaking from kind of linear consumption, where we purchase something, it reaches its end of life and we dispose of it and maybe it ends up in landfill, to this circular sustainability. And so much of what the EU is doing at the moment goes back to that goal. So the directive scope, this is where some of you are just going to say, oh, I don't need to listen to the rest of it, so I'll nip off the call. So essentially, what products are within scope? I should have started with that, and then I could have saved you some of the pain. And do feel free to leave if you absolutely need to. But why we've opened it up to the wider forum, so not just those of you that are dealing with these initial goods, is because it will absolutely extend, because it's so tightly integrated with the eco design for sustainable products, which we already know is starting to move into textiles, furniture, tires, a whole host of other goods. Then the right to repair directive works in tandem to that. So whilst today we're talking about washing machines, refrigerators, and so on, those products that already have an obligation to be repaired within their warranty period, the right to the repair directive will work in tandem with the eco design for sustainable products that will then see our textiles have to be repaired, perhaps outside of their warranty period. So our garments, our furnishings, our furniture, and so on. So the products within scope, I've listed them here at the moment. These products essentially have to be offered to consumers with the option of repair beyond their guarantee period, and the manufacturer must make sure that there are spare parts available on the open market, that repair instructions are visible. That will probably be ultimately via the digital product passport through the implementation of the eco design for sustainable products. So all of this stuff can be provided with the goods initially, and when a repair is undertaken, it must be done so via the standard repair information form. So as I say, This list, albeit of just 7 products at the moment, is absolutely going to expand via delegated acts over the course of, it may even just be the next couple of years beyond the implementation next year. Businesses within scope. So obviously, as with any regulation, manufacturers typically bear the brunt of compliance, but we're talking about manufacturers are obviously going to have to offer repair services for those products that I've listed in scope here, and that's beyond the legal guarantee period. They have to undertake all of the repairs using the standardized repair forms, and then they have to be signed up to and compliant with the EU repair platform. And then the whole part of kind of like opening up that repair or that services economy or ecosystem, they must make sure that that there are spare parts available for their product and that there is easily accessible diagnostic tools and repair information. Now, obviously sellers don't necessarily have to be the manufacturers themselves. They have obligations as well. They're impacted. So where they're selling a product that isn't necessarily their product, they must make sure that they inform consumers about the availability of repair services at the point of sale. So that repair services and longevity of product will become very much part of that initial sales pitch. And then they have to facilitate repair options during the legal guarantee period. So if they're the first point of contact from the consumer that there's an issue with the product, then the seller has an obligation to make sure that that repair is offered over replacement and liaise with the manufacturer or companies that are going to repair the goods to make sure that that happens. Now, repairers, I'm not sure whether that's the word, but repairers, so those businesses that offer repair services, they can offer their services independently on behalf of manufacturers. They can offer their services, without even enlisting anything from or obtaining anything from the manufacturers, because technically the diagnostic tools and the spare parts and so on can be bought publicly, and all of the information relating to the repairs is all going to be in the digital product passport. But similarly to the manufacturers, they must use that standardized repair form, and then must provide that kind of like transparent pricing and timelines via that repair form. And obviously, because of the obligations placed on manufacturers, they should have ready access to those spare parts and technical documentation. Now, there is talk that online platforms, and that's not your own website, we're talking about Amazon and eBay and so on, they may be involved in hosting the EU-wide repair platform, or at least facilitating consumer access to repair services. But outside of that, there's not a huge amount placed in terms of obligations on online platforms and marketplaces. The important thing, and you'll have heard me mention it before, is where a manufacturer is not a manufacturer. And under this term, the right to repair is no different. So if there are certain situations whereby if an importer or a distributor is placing one of these products, and in the future more products, on the EU market, then they might inherit the obligations of the manufacturer under some conditions. I think another point to bear in mind, and we see that a lot with regulation at the moment, is that albeit at the moment the right to repair concerns itself with B2C transactions, so it's business to consumer, it's consumer goods, but you can imagine, similar to GPSR as well, that business to business goods may be impacted. So B2B models may be impacted if those B2B goods end up in the hands of consumers, be that via secondhand sites like eBay or so on. Obviously, UK exporters, or let's say GB exporters, because Northern Ireland are going to have to comply anyway, but UK exporters are going to have to comply with this if they sell within the EU or Northern Ireland or the EEA markets. And I think the one thing that I want to mention, and why it's important to attend some of the other webinars, is this: because this repair right to repair directive complements so many other parts or so many other pieces of EU regulation, we've got this kind of layered compliance landscape that we really need to be able to navigate. We've got lots of time to do it. It's not like the mass panic that we saw last year with GPSR, but there are lots of different moving parts as different pieces of regulation come into force and so on. So it's important to understand how they all glue together. I thought, because with all EU regulation, it does break down kind of, obligations depending on the role that you play in the sale of a product, or in this case, in the sale and the maintenance of a product. So I just thought it'd be quite useful to go through kind of like at a very high level what those obligations are depending on where you sit. So obviously, as a manufacturer, they're going to have to offer their repair services for the products currently listed in Annex 2 of the directive, even after that legal guarantee has been exhausted. They must use that standardised repair form, like I said. They must make their spare parts, repair instructions, diagnostic tools available to professional repair services companies and consumers as and where relevant, which the idea is that it will be available via the digital product passport anyway. Must use the EU repair platform and must basically cannot refuse to repair a product. That's kind of like the stickler. So a manufacturer cannot refuse to repair a product unless that product is unsafe or the repair is really technically impossible. With sellers, obviously, they must prioritise that repair throughout the guarantee. They must make sure that if they're contacted by a consumer, that repair is the first remedy, unless a replacement is absolutely more cost effective or is going to be faster, i.e. that it's going to be better for the consumer to have a replacement. And again, they must inform at the point of sale that repair option exists, and it's part of the manufacturer's post-guarantee contract, if you like. For repairers, again, it's all about using the correct repair forms so that the consumer can make an informed decision and compare pricing and services and so on. And they must make sure that they use the EU repair platform. Talked a little bit about when a manufacturer is not a manufacturer, so the obligations of importers and distributors, but that's really important to be aware of the role that you play, the brand that you're distributing, and what might trigger the obligation to fall on you rather than the upstream manufacturer. I think when we think about strategic considerations for businesses impacted, particularly manufacturers are going to have to align their warranty systems, their services logistics, all of their consumer communication, align all of that with the actual directive and make sure that those systems are in place before the end of July next year. Obviously, those repair obligations may require ERP systems to be in place with updates and staff training, spare parts inventory, and so on. And I never really like to stress this too much because, why would I want to be alarmist? It's most businesses that we come across actually want to really be compliant and get it right, and if they get it wrong, it's usually a discrepancy. But non-compliance does actually carry the risks of enforcement actions and increasingly consumer litigation. So consumers are being given more and more power by the EU to take brands to court for a number of reasons. You'll see in a couple of webinars time when we talk about greenwashing and claims that cannot be substantiated around sustainability. But I think sometimes, with your brand, when you've taken time to really develop your brand, build that equity in your brand, it's the reputational damage that comes with not being compliant with local law, I think, which is more damaging than anything else. When we look at look at this regulation through the lens of an EU consumer, well, they're gaining in this by, absolutely gaining in this, because they have stronger rights to repair their goods either during or after the legal guarantee period. So it's making repair more accessible, more affordable, more transparent. So they're always aware of, whether there's a better option or a better deal out there for them. They'll have a legal right to request repairs even after the standard guarantee has ended. And like I say, it's only where that repair is technically unfeasible or impossible or unsafe that a manufacturer can say, no, we're not going to repair that product. That standardized repair form, so that is yet to be produced, but it will include estimated repair costs. So it'll provide a really clear breakdown of expected charges, including the labour, parts and diagnostics. It'll give an estimated repair duration. So what's the timeline for completion? It will give any repair conditions, so any limitations or exclusions or risks associated with the repair. And then a full description of the service proposed. Is it a full fix? Is it a partial fix? Is it a refurbishment? And so on. How long the offer remains valid for that pricing or those details on that standard information form, and a space for the consumer to actually accept or decline the repair offer. So the kind of benefits are obviously that transparency, that comparability where consumers can shop around. They have a lot more legal protection. So the chances of disputes are significantly reduced. And then that standardization, so harmonizing repair practices across the whole of the EU just strengthens that EU market, but also means that consumers are familiar with dealing with companies across the EU in a very standardized fashion. I think the considerations are obviously, like I mentioned before, embedding those processes and those forms into CRM and ERP and any kind of service portal, training staff to make sure that they know that this is the norm now. The other thing to mention is that multilingual support is always prioritized when dealing with consumers. So the standard repair information form will probably be distributed by the EU in all of the relevant 24 official languages, but then it's understanding how will you deal as an English-speaking company, how will you deal with that information in a different language. And then obviously all of this has to link with the digital product passports, of which GTD is already working on what they're going to look like. We're already ahead of that, so please don't panic about anything to do with that. The EU-wide repair platform, so again, a central hub that consumers and suppliers can access. It will have a repair directory, so it will list professional repairers, manufacturers that offer repair services, and also refurbished product providers. It'll have search and filter tools, so consumers will be able to search by product type, location, service type, and so on. And it will have all of that standardized repair form integration in there. Repairers can, or those companies offering repair services, can use it as a marketing tool. They can essentially subscribe to the portal as a means of raising their profile, just as brands can do also. A little bit like a Checker Trader, it will have a consumer feedback and rating so that consumers can report on their repair experiences. So it's helping to build trust and transparency into those trusted organizations. And then obviously it has that cross-border access. So consumers in one member state will be able to access repair services from another member state. Participation in the platform is mandatory for manufacturers, so they must list their repair services and contact details for any covered products. As I mentioned, it's voluntary for independent repairers, but they might want to increase visibility and attract more customers by registering. And then retailers and platforms may integrate listings or a link to the portal to support post-sale obligations. So if you're selling via a marketplace, you might have a link through to the portal against a product listing to demonstrate that you're compliant with the directive and so on. The platform is expected to be available from before the end of July next year. But again, if you're hooked into our kind of information stream, I'll make sure that you know when that is going to be around. It will be managed by the European Commission, or they may outsource that to a notified body. But I think the thing is, as and when we know when the platform is available, we may well take a deep dive into it ourselves, and maybe we run a webinar just showing you where everything is and how to actually access it and put the information in the right place. I think from a strategic opportunities perspective, like I always say, regulation is so painful, but actually sometimes it has some opportunities off the back of it. It's not always all negative. Obviously, complying with the repair directive, then it enhances your brand visibility. So it demonstrates that you're a repair friendly business. It will tie into your sustainability credentials if that's an area of your business that you're looking to promote. So it showcases those sustainability credentials. Great for consumer engagement. So direct access to repair services, you're just building that loyalty, and you're hopefully reducing those returns as well, and you're prolonging that whole life of the product. But then also market intelligence. So that data from the platform can inform product design and foster service optimization and innovation and so on. Because the directive amends the sale of goods directive to prioritise that repair over replacement during that legal warranty period. It's hoped that it'll encourage more sustainable consumption and, like I say, waste, which ties into the circular economy and the Green Deal and so on. And then, as I think I've conveyed throughout this, it fosters that competition amongst businesses, and the EU is really focused on those small businesses because they're able to compete with the larger organisations. They can often agree to lower repair costs because they don't have the overheads of those large corporates and so on. And then obviously, as you'll hear me talk about in a future webinar as well, is much of the regulation that's coming down the line now is about giving more power to consumers. So more legal protections through amendments to the Consumer Rights Directive and the Representative Actions Directive, making it easier for them to seek redress if repair rights are denied, or maybe they're misrepresented and they feel like they haven't received what they were expecting. Just conscious of time here, so I'm going to move on. Obviously, EU businesses and third country businesses are going to have to adapt their service models, their logistic models, their compliance systems to meet these new obligations. And obviously, UK businesses and businesses outside of the EU, full stop, are going to have to comply if they sell those goods to EU consumers. So the directive really is entirely reshaping post-sale responsibilities and market access conditions for these initial 7 product categories, but thereafter, where does it end, basically? So I think I've already talked through a lot of this. We've talked about standardized repair form, the repair platform participation, risks of non-compliance we've covered. I think if we focus particularly on companies here in the UK and those third country businesses, so your compliance is pretty much the same as EU businesses compliance. It's across the board. So you're going to be thinking about offering a post-guarantee repair service, providing repair forms, ensuring that your spare parts are available, you need to make sure that your processes and your contracts and your terms and conditions align with the EU consumer law, even if our domestic law here differs slightly. So you might want to consider enlisting the services of EU-based service partners. I hate talking about that because I want us to control as much as we can in the UK, but it's about what is practically feasible. So, are you looking at EU-based service partners to deliver this kind of repair service? Are you looking at localized compliance teams? Those teams can run diagnostics on product before they may be sent back to the UK, for example. And then, what do your adjusted warranty and logistic models look like? If you, like I said before, if you're a distributor or an importer and you're buying those goods in from overseas and then you're selling them onto the EU, it's important that you understand your obligations, whether you're deemed the manufacturer or whether you are just an importer or a distributor. And I think, always trying to see the positives for UK businesses. I think there will be some businesses that are further afield outside of the UK that will not want to comply with this. They'll see having that kind of EU-based service partner or localized compliance team or amending their systems and processes anyway as just being too expensive to comply. So I think, not only can repairability be seen as a market differentiator, especially for those sustainability conscious businesses, but also there's potentially market share available as other providers have to withdraw from the EU market through not being able to comply. What else do I want to say? Product design and life cycle planning. So I think you're basically having to think about strategically integrating the repair obligations into your product design, your service models, your compliance systems, and so on. And this is all, if you watch the webinar on eco design for sustainable products, you'll see how this is so similar, because basically eco design and modularization of product and being able to repair product and just replace small parts of product is all around that, reducing waste and preventing the main product from going to landfill by just repairing or replacing certain parts of it. Conscious, so opportunity. I think when we think about who are who's going to gain from this regulation, this directive undoubtedly creates new business opportunities in repair services and circular product design and spare parts logistics and so on and so forth. So there will be some companies who all of a sudden the EU market is opened up for them, whether they be manufacturers, retailers or third country exporters. I think that independent repair company can all of a sudden scale quite quickly across borders. They're based in the EU, they're going to have the ability, based in one member state, they're going to have the availability to offer their repair services across the EU now because of those harmonized rules. Retailers and manufacturers are going to be able to offer in-house or partnered repair services post-warranty. So a manufacturer here in the UK may not want to bring something back to the UK to repair it, but instead can have it done in the EU, because everything is there. From the spare parts are accessible, the diagnostic tools are accessible, and the technical information is accessible. Spare parts logistics becomes a growth area as that demand for long-term availability grows. So, from going from 5 years to, extending the product life cycle of product, thinking, well, we only expect it to be in circulation for 5 years. Now, maybe with the repair directive, it's in circulation for 15 years. And then again, refurbishment and remanufacturing businesses can gain more and more traction as repair becomes the default. Which is the whole ambition of the EU, really. But that design for repair is really fundamental for the EU. And remember, I I talk often about how the EU gets a bad rap at being always at the forefront of sustainability regulation, but this has been grandfathered over daily as more and more markets look to adopt, small parts, but maybe not in the scale of what the EU does with a piece of regulation, but they take a more modular approach to it. So I think that design for repair becomes a competitive differentiator for you if you're looking at the EU market. And who knows, maybe the UK catches up at some point and some of this stuff will become mandatory here in our domestic market. But again, it's all about that kind of repair, modular approach to design and manufacturing, upgradable products, upgradable components for products, and so on. Also, product as a service model. So that is on the rise as well, leasing and subscription models for products that already benefit from an embedded repair logic. I think digital platforms and consumer engagement is on the increase. So repair marketplaces that can connect consumers with those certified repairers and spare parts distributors and refurbished goods and so on. You can see that rise almost like giving birth to a whole load of new repair-focused eBay sites. And then again, so much of what you're doing with the repair directive feeds into other parts of sustainability positioning. So if you see your business as embracing sustainability as a pillar for growth, then this all ties into that, so sustainability branding around repairability, it builds trust, and it aligns with EU consumer expectations, but also the global consumer, that demographic is massively growing. And obviously retailers and brands that can use repair services help to reduce that scope 3 emission, which all ties into your sustainability credentials. I think there are some considerations for us as UK businesses now that we're outside of the EU, and how can we leverage those EU repair rules to gain market access and stand out from those countries further afield that maybe cannot or don't want to comply, and how can we create more repair friendly product lines that can be tailored for EU consumers. So in areas like electronics, appliances, mobile devices, and as I say, longer term textiles, furnitures, home furnishing, and so on. So that's the way the EU is moving. We've got to kind of think, well, how do we get there as well? And then planning for compliance. I think the first thing with everything is always to determine whether or not you're in scope. So if you're on the call today and you're not making or distributing one of those initial 7 products, then you might be thinking, I don't need to worry about this for a while. That's absolutely fine. But similarly, know that it is coming to other product sectors. There is a requirement to appoint an EU authorised representative as part of compliance with the Right to Repair Directive. Because that individual or that company needs to be your legal representative to manage any repair obligations, consumer interactions, or regulatory communications, importantly. I think you need to be thinking about your post-warranty repair infrastructure. So develop or partner with an EU-based repair network that offers those services beyond the legal guarantee period. Start making sure that your spare parts are readily available, that there's a buffer, a stock buffer. Making sure that your repair instructions are available for the legally required duration, and also in the language of the member state where the product is being shipped. Making sure that you're using that standardized repair form and it's integrated into your customer service workflow, CRM systems, digital portals, and so on. Prepare for that using that EU repair platform participation. And again, we will we'll make sure that we take a look at that as and when we can get access to it, and anybody that needs some help with that, we can provide that. Consider that multilingual support and cross-border service consistency. So think about the fact that most EU regulation at the moment is, at least where it's geared towards the consumer, is starting to dictate more and more that the consumer has access to information in their native language, which obviously is not something that the UK has had to do while dealing with the EU. And then making sure that your warranty and sales protocols are updated so that you're always prioritizing that repair over replacement during that guarantee period. And again, unless the replacement is safer or faster, or safer or faster, basically. And then I think, just trying to think what else to talk about. Monitor the transposition and enforcement. So we kind of do that for you as part of this, as part of these webinars that we do. So once we have access to the platform, once we see the repair information form, then we'll maybe do an updated webinar and make sure that you're aware of that. And yeah, I think that is it. The last one that I always mention is just opt in for further updates. We've got our webinar activity for the rest of 2025 and into 2026 is already on the homepage, so feel free to sign up for some of those webinars that I've already talked about that are linked to this one and others. If you're sat on the call today and you're thinking, I haven't got a Scooby what she's on about, which I wouldn't blame you, because I am running on empty at the moment. I've had almost 2 all-nighters back to back. So if that is you, then please feel free to book a 15-minute call. That'll probably be with myself, and you're very welcome to do that. We can talk about your particular business and what your interpretation of your obligations are.